Okay, so we are looking at text 9.1, which is JFK's inaugural address in Washington on January the 20th. This is actually split across two videos. It is a very iconic speech, and it is dense with kind of literary and linguistic features that really need unpacking, so it takes a little bit longer to explain. So let's start with the gap first of all. What we've got here is the transcript of a spoken crafted speech, and evidently there is a very wide audience. I mean, obviously initially it's written and drafted by himself and the staff and the senior advisors. And then we've got a primary audience who are there in Washington literally listening to it. And then that goes to an American audience via the television, and then is broadcast to global audiences as well. Now, we're very used to being able to watch stuff on telly, but at this point in time in 1961, this is all quite new technology. Okay, so JFK is very much aware that he is addressing this wide global audience, and that comes through in his speech. The purpose then, as a kind of formal and legal purpose, that he's been signed into the US executive government. He's there to make a statement about the aims and objectives of his new administration, and also the kind of bigger picture stuff. He's there to establish himself as the leader of America. He only gets in by a minority, so in giving not by a minority, by a small majority. Okay, so he's really trying to get all of America on side with him at this point. And the rest of the world. Okay, he wants to be seen as the leader of the free world, and he's also there to address and engage a large group of people. And we can see that in the opening 4 paragraphs. Okay, they all address different groups of people or political bodies in America or around the world. Okay, and we get this this repeated structure at the beginning of all of these paragraphs. So they all open with "to those" or some form of that. Okay, the first 2 are "to those." When we get to the third one, it becomes "to our sister republics," and the fourth one is "to the World Assembly." Okay, but we can definitely talk about this repeated structure that goes through each of these paragraphs in and opening them. And it's 2 parts. So the address is "to those," and then "we pledge," and that continues "to those, we pledge to our," we offer a special pledge to the World Assembly, we renew our pledge, and then there's a slightly different one in the 5th paragraph. Okay, but certainly in those first 4 paragraphs, what we get from that kind of syntactical structure is a sense of cohesion. It's really important when you're giving a speech to kind of structure it and to use repetition so that people can follow what you're trying to say. But the fact that everything is very tightly structured from a syntactical point of view also gives a real kind of gravity to his speech and a kind of sense of seriousness. You know, it's clearly been very carefully edited before it's delivered. And that's also making him come across as very intelligent. Now, he was also a very young president, so that's another important bit of contextual knowledge. So he clearly, in this inaugural address, wants to make it clear that he is intelligent and that he's capable of holding this kind of a very important position. So let's come back to look in more detail at that first paragraph then. "To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away, merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny." Okay, so we've also got, and I've highlighted these in yellow all the way through, these balanced clauses. It's a little bit like parallelism, but it's not necessarily the exact same grammatical structure, but you can see that these things link together. So whom we welcome, we pledge our word. So that's the first one. What it does, all of the balance clauses all the way through, and you'll see there's an awful lot of them, is it creates a real rhythm and cadence which enables JFK to have this very powerful delivery, to create a very engaging speech, and that's obviously going to have an effect on the audience who are listening. Straight away in your extract section, we've got one of the key ideologies that comes through, which is this idea of freedom. And throughout, I would say the voice is very much one of kind of peace and inclusivity. He's got very high ideals about what he aspires to do. He's actually addressing the new African states who have just freed themselves from European colonial control. That's what he's talking about here. Notice the alliteration, okay, and I've highlighted all the alliteration for you in blue to make it easier to track as we go through. We've also got plosive sounds at the beginning of these: colonial control. What that does is it gives a kind of harsh tone to what he's saying, and it makes his distaste for that colonial control very evident. What he's saying, though, is that European control won't pass away merely to be replaced by this iron tyranny. Now, this is an interesting modified noun phrase. It's really emphasising the sense of oppression, but it's obviously a contextual reference to the Iron Curtain. So potentially he's talking to the USSR and all the states that kind of got subsumed into that. And then we get another balanced clause. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom. Again, quite often he does this, uses these balanced phrases throughout to create a sense of contrast between two concepts. Okay, so we can't expect them to always be on our side, but we're going to hope, and note in that the absolute optimism that comes there. This is a very optimistic voice all the way through. We hope they're going to strongly support their freedom. We've got another bit of alliteration here, strongly supporting. I don't think there's anything particular that you can say about the sort of sibilant sound, but what it does is it obviously draws our attention to the strength of their support. And then we get this same concept again, like we've got free here and freedom here. So this real sense of freedom as being a key democratic ideal, and that he is presenting America as the country that is going to police the rest of the world and ensure that this freedom is present. Then we get a slight shift in tone from this kind of positivity, and to remember that in the past those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. Okay, so another feature of the text is that there's figurative language that runs throughout it. What that does is it adds a kind of intellectual tone to the voice, and it also helps to engage the audience with his serious tone. It's just he really means what he's saying here, okay? Here, it's not 100% clear exactly who he's talking to. You know, it could be anybody in recent history at that time who has sought the wrong kind of power, dictatorial power, we can assume it to be. So it could be a reference to Hitler, but again, particularly considering he's mentioned the Iron Tyranny, this could very much be a reference to the USSR. Okay, let's look at the second paragraph then. So we talked about this cohesive syntactical structure and how that's repeated, and then we also get further alliteration here. So to those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery. This is really emotive as well. He's really trying to engage his audience emotively. You know, the idea that they're struggling, so that verb is really fitting in with this kind of positioning himself as being against oppression. Then we get all these plosive sounds here again, break the bonds of mass misery. These are also monosyllabic words, break and bonds, which means that you really spit them out when you articulate them. Gives it a particular harshness. Perhaps you could say, you know, it shows his hatred of the bonds, the chains that exist. Maybe it's creating the sounds of the bonds being broken. And that really contrasts with the longer M sound of mass misery. And I think what this alliteration is doing is it's really kind of dragging out that long sound to create a sense of the misery that's really spread across the masses and around the globe. Okay, and we've also got this idea of pledging again. Now, pledging, it's an interesting verb, okay, because what it suggests is a solemn promise. And what that does, the fact that he's pledging to all of these people, it gives a really serious tone to what he's saying. We pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves for whatever period is required. Not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. So as well as all these balanced clauses throughout, we have a number of examples of triadic structures. Here this is being used for emphasis, for rhythm and effect, okay? And we're really contrasting these first two concepts, because the communists are doing it and seeking votes, with then what is given as the real reason in the third part, that actually this is moral. So what he's doing is by putting these items in a list and contrasting the first two with the third, he's really powerfully enforcing his moral worldview. Okay, so this really well-crafted syntactical structure continues with another balanced clause. So if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. Balanced clauses are quite often can create antithesis as well. So here we've got a contrast between the many who are poor, so this is most people, and the few who are rich. And this really reinforces the kind of moral worldview that's been emphasized so far throughout this, that we have an absolute responsibility, or America has an absolute responsibility to help the poor. Now, in terms of addressing his world audience, you would imagine this is going to go down very well, but he needs to engage his American audience with this whole concept of kind of freedom as well. And I suppose that can be achieved by the way in which he is presenting America as this kind of powerful country that is capable of kind of fighting oppression all the way around the world. Okay, so third paragraph. Again, we've got a to our, but this time it's to our sister republics south of our border. So now he's talking to Central and South America. Interesting that he uses this noun sister, which has got those kind of familial, nurturing connotations because they're neighbours. And that's reinforced with this modifier special. Okay, so there's something particularly important about these guys because they are their neighbours. And then we get another balanced phrase. This is actually balanced within the phrase, okay, to convert our good words into good deeds. So this is important as well. He realizes that what he's saying is idealistic, but he realizes that to be a true kind of powerful state, they have to transform that into action. In a new alliance for progress to assist free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. So another bit of imagery here, potentially as well. This is echoing the kind of freedom from slavery that happened in America and stating this idea that America is the land of the free. We've got more plosive sounds around the idea of kind of slavery and bondage as well, casting off the chains. And this is emotive as well, isn't it? Those kind of literary elements really help it to be emotive in order to kind of create a sense of his hatred of all of the oppression and the poverty that is around the world. And look, yet another balanced phrase, but this peaceful revolution of hope cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Okay, so what he's saying here is like, yes, we're optimistic, we're hopeful, but we shan't allow that to become prey to hostile powers. So we're going to remain strong. Kind of fits with the tone throughout that he's got this very idealistic, peaceful, inclusive voice, but he's also trying to establish a sense of his own authority. Some real emotive language here in the second part of this balanced phrase, okay, with the adjective hostile emphasizing the danger that's there in the world. And then we've got this noun prey, which again reinforces this idea of lurking danger. Now that's important to his American audience, you know, to get them on side. He needs to establish the point of view that actually we're in danger in kind of the way that world politics are going at the moment, and we need to change our approach and do something differently, and I am the man to help you do that. Then we get this discourse marker let, which becomes a feature later on in the text. So let all our neighbours know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas, and let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of his own house. Let is interesting. It's a discourse marker here, okay, but it's also an imperative, but it also implies a request, okay? So I think, and I talk about this in the second video too, I think that's a really nice way of noting the kind of the inclusivity of his voice, but also the authority that is there within it. Obviously what he's talking about here is communism, okay? So I think the aggression or subversion, you know, in the 1950s you've got McCarthyism in America and the sense that they're going to hunt down any communists who are there. It was seen as a real visceral threat. I think that's what he's talking about here. And let, okay, so this fronted conjunction is also reinforcing that sense of power and what they're going to stand for, and let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of his own house. This metaphor is again establishing that sense of an authoritative voice. Okay, let's come to look at the fourth paragraph then. So here the kind of repetition, the phrasing changes slightly. So to that World Assembly, so now we're talking to the UN, we renew our pledge of support. Okay, so making it clear that that was there in the first place. We're just renewing it, we're just refreshing it. It's interesting the way that he describes the UN as being our last best hope. Okay, so those pre-modifiers are interesting, aren't they? So our last hope, that suggests that we're in real danger, but it's our best hope, so that's the sense of optimism. Another thing that kind of typifies the voice, I would say. And then we've got this this balance as well between the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace. So again, you've got that balance from within a phrase, okay? And what that's doing is creating a sense of contrast. The instruments of war, there's a real threat coming from that. Obviously here we're talking about nuclear power, have far outpaced the instruments of peace, which is like the UN and diplomacy. So again, giving us this sense that we're in a dangerous position at the moment. And then we get this triadic structure. To prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective, to strengthen its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Now, this alliteration here, this sense of strengthening its shield, is also a piece of imagery, okay? And what that's establishing, it's really setting up America as a kind of righteous protector, and that they, along with the UN, are going to support those that are weak, okay? So again, it's this very idealistic view of America and what it can achieve. We've also got this triadic structure, which becomes climatic, I would say, okay? So it's not just a forum for invective, we're going to strengthen its shield, and we're also going to enlarge it, so we're going to make sure that it has power across the world. So there's real optimism coming through here about the UN and what the UN might be capable of. Let us look at this fifth paragraph then. So a little bit of a shift here, finally. So we've got that fronted conjunction, making it clear that this is like a shift, and this is the last kind of group of people that he's going to address. To those nations who would make themselves our adversary. It's a very different tone here, because obviously he's addressing their enemies and their adversaries. We offer not a pledge, but a request. Okay, so not offering a solemn undertaking, actually we're going to ask something of you, which seems maybe a little bit weak, okay, but he does go on to explain why that is later on. But it's certainly very polite. It gives it this kind of diplomatic tone. And if you think about what he's saying about the UN, you know, JFK is very much trying to establish in this speech that, you know, after the deadlock of the Cold War, what we need to do now is establish some kind of diplomacy in order to change the politics. Okay, and then we get this metaphor that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Okay, so that's an interesting metaphor, because he's making it clear, which he does throughout, through the idea of it being a quest, that this is going to be a difficult and a hard journey. And then we get a load of emotive language before the dark powers of destruction. Okay, that imagery really is creating a sense of foreboding. You've got more plosive sounds there, which again gives it that sense of foreboding. Unleashed by science, engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction. So you've got a semantic field of destruction here, haven't you? You've got destruction itself repeated twice, and you've got this idea of it being unleashed. It's going to engulf us all. Okay, and that's really emotive, and what it does is it establishes this sense of fear, that he needs America to come together, to all be on the same side, so that they can challenge the USSR and establish a new kind of diplomacy. And that's important for his American audience, okay, that they sense that this danger is very real and that they need to come together. Okay, please have a little look at part 2 as well, so that you see the analysis of the rest.